I'm going to make some chocolate chip cookies and just walk you through the process of that recipe, talking to you a few things about this along the way. And obviously you've got your questions there to answer. You might want to take some notes as we go through the video and then answer the questions at the end. If you read through the questions, obviously you'll know what you're going to be asked on, and then you can make some notes, or obviously you can pause the video, write down your answer to the question and then kind of keep going. So first of all, I've completed my personal hygiene routine. Obviously, hopefully we all remember what that includes. So I have washed my hands, I've taken off any jewellery that I had on, I've tied my hair back, I've got an apron on. If you're wanting to make this at home and you don't have an apron, just something that's going to kind of protect your clothes if you don't want your clothes to get dirty. If you're not that bothered about getting your clothes dirty, then obviously fire ahead. I washed my hands, and that's about me. I'm ready to cook. So, for our chocolate chip cookies, I am going to set my oven to 180. I'm going to have that preheating, so it's really important to have your oven preheated so that your cookies are going to start cooking straight away. These are not going to be in the oven for very long because we want them to be kind of crispy and set on the outside but still kind of gooey on the inside. So they need to go into the oven as soon as possible and to start cooking as soon as possible. So if the oven is at the right temperature, then that means that they'll start cooking as soon as they go into the oven instead of waiting for it to get to the right temperature and then start cooking. So we're at 180 just now, or gas mark 4. I've also got a baking tray ready, so I've put some greaseproof paper on a baking tray so that my cookies are not going to stick to the tray. This is like non-stick paper that I've put on. If you don't have any of this paper, you can just sprinkle some flour onto your baking tray, and that will make sure you spread it out obviously, and that will mean that your cookies are not going to stick to the baking tray once you bake them. I'm going to start by measuring out my butter, and I've got 2 different types of sugar in this. So we have 100 grams of margarine, no, 125 grams of margarine. So this stock is quite a good one. If you're buying margarine in the shops, you need to make sure that it says fat and then it says 70 grams on the label. There are some that will say 40 grams, but that's got too much water in it for what we need it for, and your cookies will be quite soggy. So you want to have at least 70 grams of fat in your 100 grams. So make sure you're reading that label. So 125 grams, I'm going to put that straight into my bowl because I've made it go to 0 on the scales, and then I can build it up to 125. We want to have exactly the right amount, so we're looking for really accurate measurements. We want to have accurate measurements because we are baking something, so it's going to needs really exact amounts in our recipe because it needs to have a really good balance of all the ingredients. If you had too much of one thing, if you had too much butter for example, then it could be quite greasy. If we have too much sugar, then it's going to be all crispy. If we have too much flour, the cookies are going to be far too dry. So it's really important to have really accurate measurements to make sure we get the absolute perfect product. I'm going to put my butter back in the fridge because we want that to keep nice and set. So if you're storing butter, you want to have a lid on that's going to be nice and tight. You're not going to get anything in there, and then that's going to be in the fridge so that it doesn't melt and become destroyed. I'm then going to measure out my sugar. So brown sugar, I'm going to need 100 grams of this. So I'm going to put my scales back to 0. Obviously if you had the scales like we have in school, you can take the top bit off and then put that into your bowl, and then you're back at 0 anyway. So make sure your scales are at 0 to make sure we're going to be able to accurately measure. Sprinkle in 100 grams of brown sugar. Exactly 100. Make sure that's really tightly wrapped up so that there's not going to be any air getting into there. We want that to stay nice and soft, so if it's tightly wrapped up, then that means it will. If there's any air gets into the sugar, then it sets and becomes really, really hard. So if you get any big chunks of sugar in your sugar, that's what's happened. I'm then going to have 125 grams of caster sugar. Back to 0. And then use my spoon in 125 grams just in case I get too much in. I can use my spoon to take out what I don't need. right up to exactly 125, making sure it's nice and accurate. And then I'm going to use a wooden spoon and I'm going to cream this together. So when we're creaming things together, we're trying to mix the butter and the sugar together to kind of form a paste, and that paste is adding in some air into your mixture. Going to create quite a good base for what we're looking for. So we're pressing it up against the sides, making sure all the butter and sugar is mixing really well together. If it gets stuck to your spoon, just scrape it all off with your finger. Obviously you've washed your hands, so you can use your hands if you need to. You shouldn't be able to see any of the little sugar crystals because they should all be mixed into the butter. So pressing it up against the side of the bowl really hard. The more you mix it at this point, the better it's going to be because you're adding in all that air. The air bubbles get trapped between the butter and the sugar, and then it holds it in there for when it's baked, and then nice and light and fluffy. Okay, all mixed together. You shouldn't be able to see any of the sugar, the little sugar bits. It should be all nice and a wee bit lighter in colour than it was to begin with, and that's when you're going to know that you're finished with that step. I'm just going to wash my hands quickly because I've got sugar all over them. The next step, we are going to prepare our egg. We've got our egg, we're going to crack this into a little bowl. So to do that, we're going to gently hit it on the side of the bowl. Use your thumbs to tear that apart and let it go into the bowl. Now if you had a little bit of shell in there, a little trick is to use your eggshell to try and scoop it out. So the small bit of eggshell that you've accidentally dropped in there will stick to this bigger bit. So if you put that in, go under it and then scoop it out. It's quite a good little trick to get that out of there. And then your eggshell is going to go straight in the bin, and you need to wash your hands again. You need to wash your hands once you've touched raw egg, because there might be salmonella, which is a food poisoning bacteria in the egg, and then obviously we don't want that going into anything else. We don't want it all over the spoon that I'm about to touch, we don't want it on anything else that I'm about to touch around the kitchen. We want to keep it all in one place. Nowadays salmonella isn't really very common in UK eggs, but obviously it's good to have the precaution in place just in case. I'm also going to add my vanilla extract in here, so we only need about 2.5 mils of vanilla extract, which is about the same as the lid that comes on it. So pour that into the egg. The vanilla extract is just going to add some flavour. It's really its only purpose in here. And then I'm going to mix that together with a fork until it's all mixed together and all kind of one colour. Just pop that to the side just now. I also need to measure out my self-raising flour, so I'm going to get another little bowl. Plate will do actually. Make sure our scales are at 0, and then I'm going to measure out 225 grams of self-raising flour. The reason that we're going to use self-raising flour is because we do want these to rise a little bit. Obviously we've got the alternative could be plain flour. If we used plain flour, then they would just stay completely flat and we wouldn't get any kind of rise out of them. So we want them to rise a little bit just so that they are nice and light. Some biscuits that you make will use plain flour because they don't really want any rise in them. But all biscuits will have some kind of flour in it, probably some kind of sugar, too much now, some kind of fat, so that fat could be butter, could be oil. Quite rare to have a biscuit with oil in. and had some kind of binding agent, so it could be egg, it could be milk, something that's going to bring it all together. And then I'm going to leave that to the side. Now we want to add in half the egg, half the flour, mix it together, and then the rest of it. So we are going to sieve the flour. So I've got my sieve here. I'm going to lift in about half of the flour into the sieve. When you are sieving things, you're adding air to them, so we want to have it just above the bowl, enough that there's going to be enough space for it to fall down. And then as it falls through the air, it captures some air bubbles, and that's going to take it into your biscuits, which will make your cookies, sorry, which will make them even better. Set that in, press it all down. If there's any little brown bits left, we're just going to chuck them out. That's just kind of the bran from left over from the flour. So when the flour's been grown, it's been grown in wheat kernels, and then it's been processed into what we obviously have as flour here, but there is a little like coating that is on those, which can sometimes make it way into flour. If you had a brown flour, then that's all left in. About half of the egg, and then we're going to mix that all together. Again, pressing it up against the side nice and slowly. Making sure your flour is not going all over the place. Obviously if you stir it and then some of the flour comes out, that means that you don't have the exact right amount that you're using or measured. Make sure it's all mixed together. When you just put in half and half like this, it does make it a wee bit easier to mix because there's not as much mixture going on at once. I'm going to put the rest of the flour in. Sieve that all in. And then the rest of the egg. Now if you put in your egg, put in your flour, and then it's still too dry, so if it's not coming together into like a ball, then you could add a little bit of milk just to make sure it's going to come all together. But make sure you've really pressed it up against the side of the bowl, make sure you've got all the mixture included before you go for that, because we don't really want to add in much milk because it's not really one of the ingredients, but it will help to bring it all together. It should be like this, really sticky in a kind of ball. And then we're going to add in our chocolate chips. Now you can add whatever colour chocolate chips you like. These are kind of half and half, dark chocolate and milk chocolate in the bottom there, so I've got a kind of mixture. That's absolutely fine. You need 200 grams of any kind of chocolate chips, whatever they are. I'm going to sprinkle those in. Put my little washing pile over by the sink, ready to be washed up later on. And then give this a good mix all together. And there we are, ready to put it onto the baking tray. This cookie dough can be kept until a later date, so I'm only going to cook about half of it just now, and I'm going to keep half until another day. So with the other half, I'm going to put it into a kind of freezer bag, a little airtight bag. You could just use a little tub, and I'm going to put it in the freezer. And then once I'm ready to bake another lot of cookies, obviously I won't have to make the whole dough again because I've got some in the freezer. I can just go and take it out and let it defrost a wee bit and then bake them. As long as they're really tightly covered in a little tub, then they'll be absolutely fine. This unfortunately is not edible cookie dough because it has the raw egg in it, so unfortunately you can't just eat this like this. or put it in ice cream or anything like that, you would need to make what's called an actual edible cookie dough. So the ones that you get like in the shops and things like that don't have any egg in them, because you're not really supposed to eat raw egg obviously, so they don't have any raw egg in them. This is the kind of size we're looking for. So I've got a little teaspoon, I've taken a teaspoonful of cookie dough, and we're going to put it on the baking tray like that, and then once that bakes it's all going to flatten out. So because of that we need to make sure that they're really well spread out, so they're not going to bake into each other. Obviously if you wanted one big massive cookie then you might put them close together, and then they can bake into each other if you like. So I'm rolling them all, taking about a teaspoon, putting them onto the tray. These are going to be in the oven for about 9 or 10 minutes, not very long at all, and that's just enough to make them nice and kind of crispy and set on the outside, but still have them nice and gooey and soft on the inside. I'm going to put 2 more in this tray, and then I'm going to bake this tray. And then once those come out, I'll put them onto the cooling tray, onto the wire rack, and then I can bake the rest of the ones that I want to bake just now. And in that time, I'm going to put the rest into a little bag or into a container and put that in the freezer ready for another day. There we go, I've got them all spread out, ready to go into the oven. So nice and spread out, they're not going to bake into each other. They are going to obviously flatten out in the oven, and as I say, they're going to go in for about 9 or 10 minutes. I've got my oven gloves. I'm going to put my oven gloves on to put them into the oven just to make sure that I'm not going to get burned. Obviously we know that the tray in the oven could be really hot, and that's why we use those. So that's the cookies been in about 9 minutes, so I'm going to take them out. We're looking for them to be nice and golden, which they are. They will still be really soft on the top, so I'm just going to leave them there for a few minutes and let them cool down a little bit. So they're still really soft, they're just shrinking back down just now, which is what we're looking for. I've got my cooling tray and a spatula ready to lift the cookies off and put them onto the cooling tray to let them totally cool down. This wire rack is our cooling tray. Obviously we've got these in school, we have used them before, and that just means that the air gets right the way around them and lets them completely cool down. Once these have totally cooled down, then I'm going to store them in an airtight tub, so a tub that's got like a really secure lid, and because I'm going to store them in there, they should last about a week, which means that we can make them in advance of, if I was making them for like a party or something like that, then I could make them in advance and keep them for around about a week. Okay.